Hey, Low Code Approach listeners, this is Wendy Haddad. Before we jump into this week's episode, I wanted to let you know that we are starting to plan for the next season, and we want to make sure we hear from you on what is most important and relevant in terms of the topics that we'll be choosing. So if you could open a web browser and pop over to aka.ms/low code topic request, that's aka.ms/low code topic request, all one word. Fill out that brief survey on what topics and what subjects, what guests you might want to hear from. And who knows, maybe it'll make it into the next season of the podcast. Thanks so much and happy listening.
Hey everybody, welcome to a new episode of the Low Code Approach. I'm Sean Feeney, a Senior Product Marketing Manager on the Microsoft Power Platform team, and I'm joined by...
I'm Wendy Haddad. I'm a Senior Cloud Solution Architect, Delivery Lead, and a former Microsoft customer, and I am joined by...
I just hit level 50 and do not really mix my words. Ken Aguilard, Principal Program Manager inside of Power Apps. Today, Sean, who are we joined by?
Yeah, so we have a repeat guest on. We're lucky enough that somebody actually wanted to come back, which is a plus for us. We're joined by Bill Ryan, Director of Business Programs, and we chatted with Bill about Power Automate for desktop. Hey, Bill, welcome back.
Great to be with you guys again.
Awesome. And so if I know we said you're a repeat guest, but what we should do is just do a refresher real fast. What is Power Automate for desktop?
Sure. So Power Automate Desktop is, I think, one of the unsung heroes of the overall Power Automate suite. We acquired a company called Softomotive about 4 years ago. And what Power Automate Desktop gives us is the ability to create what we call robotic process automation components or solutions, where companies that have desktop-based solutions that they've created over the years, many organizations have these legacy applications that they built in-house. And even in certain industries like healthcare, there's still a lot of third-party applications that are based on this sort of three-tier architecture that are still run on-prem. And what Power Automate Desktop gives us is the ability to be able to record actions or scripts for, let's say it's a data entry process for an invoice. And it's a desktop application that the user logs into their desktop, opens up the app, goes into their invoice and enters the information and then submits it for a workflow process. Well, it's really, really hard to integrate that with cloud solutions that we have today. So Power Automate Desktop gives us the ability to record that action in what we call either an attended or an unattended flow process. And attended means that we have to log in and execute the flow, but an unattended one means that we can record it, including the person's credentials, and then save that script and execute it based on some timing that we want to do. So instead of having that person do that manual data entry that they were doing before, we could have the machine do it. That's what's called robotic process automation. And it's a huge, huge opportunity for organizations to be able to enable their legacy systems and connect them to cloud processes as they move to the cloud and incorporate them into other large-scale solutions that they're building from a digital transformation perspective as they move forward into this new cloud-based world we live in.
So, Bill, this is really helpful, but I think that where our customers can get confused is the which tool when. When would I go the robotic process automation route versus the Cloudflow route? We have other Power Automate tools like Process Advisor. So how does this all fit together? And how do you walk a customer through figuring out which tool to pursue in our Power Automate portion of the Power Platform?
So if you're doing and integrating with our cloud solutions like M365, where you're integrating with SharePoint or you're integrating with Excel, and you're doing work in the cloud, that's where a Cloudflow works really, really well. When you're interfacing with a desktop solution, as I mentioned earlier, it might be a billing system, it might be a third-party application that you're using. Like, for instance, in the medical field, there's a lot of data entry systems for patient records that customers are using. And it is either through a web browser that is connected to an on-prem server, or it is a desktop application that they've created and they deploy to each desktop that the user logs into. And it's through a client-based system that runs on that desktop machine. It's really, really hard to integrate cloud-based solutions and then be able to integrate these flows that are available on the desktop with these cloud solutions that we're creating. So for instance, if we're creating something that is, let's say the customer has a cloud-based CRM system, let's say it's Dynamics 365, for instance, and it might be, let's say it's customer service, but they have and they need a way to be able to integrate and execute something that utilizes information from that desktop application. They can create a business process flow using Power Automate Desktop to record the transaction and the steps within that solution, and then be able to integrate and use that data in a cloud flow. So there is a way for us to be able to connect the cloud experience and the cloud solutions we're creating with these desktop-based applications that have been built. And there's a lot of large organizations from telco, healthcare, manufacturing that have spent an enormous amount of money and time on building these client-based on-prem applications that are really, really difficult to integrate with. They may not have APIs that are available that we can connect to. And so building an RPA solution with Power Automate Desktop is the way to be able to use that and collect that data and then utilize it in our cloud solutions.
Bill, can we go a little bit deeper on some of the things?
Sure.
As you're talking, I'm forming this internal flow chart in my head, pardon the pun there, if you will, of when to use what. We have cloud flows, we have RPA, but we also have toolings like AI Builder, which allows us to do things like ingest forms and train models along those lines. Why would I use RPA over, say, creating an AI Builder model with the forms and then ingesting those there and then just feeding forms in to a document library and then letting everything else sort of run the process, if you will?
That's a great question. And I think it's based on the use case. In the case of AI Builder, you might use that for processing again, the medical industry is rife with still using faxes and being able to take a document and scan it in from a paper document into an electronic document, using AI Builder to be able to access that document from a repository and then be able to use OCR or object character recognition to read that document and then use that data for some other purpose is a perfect example of where you would use AI Builder. Another example of using AI Builder would be for scanning emails, where a customer service organization might want to look for specific keyword identifiers that indicate that someone is not happy with their service. And being able to scan through those emails to then execute a workflow to raise that customer issue and have somebody triage it is a perfect example of where you'd use AI Builder. But with Power Automate Desktop and working where you're automating tasks on that local machine, let's say you have a group of data entry people for processing invoices. Let's say that department has 20 people. Those are 20 people that are working, 8 hours a day, simply processing invoices. When an invoice comes into an organization, be able to create a Power Automate Desktop flow to open that invoice, inspect that invoice, and then do something with business logic to be able to determine what needs to be done with that invoice or to process that invoice. So that individual that was doing that manually doesn't have to do that anymore. They can go off and do other things. They might be, working as an analyst now and analyzing invoices that are coming in and trends for invoices. Maybe they're doing something on the financial side that's a little bit more impactful rather than just being that person that's entering that data every single day. And then being able to use that person as a knowledge worker within the organization gives the organization the ability to do more with their people and to be able to execute their business processes in a better way. So it's removing the day-to-day drudgery of having somebody do that process manually and executing it as a robotic process that gives them the ability to relieve some of the pressure on people that are doing those manual tasks. The difference between a desktop flow and a cloud flow is pretty significant when you think about what Power Automate Desktop has in terms of the ability to record a process and then be able to programmatically interact with that process to do something, where you can step in and create logic to execute what the human was doing. Let's say they're analyzing the variables or values within a specific invoice. And if something is out of step, then there's some logic that they would execute or that they would do naturally as part of their training. Hey, if this value is this, then we do this with it. You can actually record that process and then build in the scripting and the code to execute what that human was doing, and then save that and execute it over and over and over again. So the powerful thing here is that that script can run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so instead of waiting for someone to come in on their shift and open up an invoice and process that invoice, that robotic process can run in the background all the time. And so not only are they sort of enabling that human to go and do something else that's more of value, but you're giving the organization the ability to process those invoices a lot faster and then be able to be a little bit more intelligent in terms of what they need to do with that, with anomalies within that specific process, and then execute other workflow to be able to do with less, I guess is really what it boils down to.
Bill, the internal mental diagram is growing even wider and longer now. So maybe two questions, just like we're kind of all sort of giving each other's eyes and whatnot. Wendy and I are feeding each other information. So for me, question is, where does Copilot fit in with this?
Well, I think what's really fascinating about Copilot is this generational capability that we've built in to the platform that really helps the maker in executing and creating the scripts and the work that needs to be done. When you open up Power Automate Desktop and you've enabled Copilot for Power Automate Desktop, you can tell Copilot what you want to do, and it will start either asking you questions more deeper about what you want to do, but it'll start generating scripts for you. And it'll make suggestions for you too in terms of what you need to do and how you need to do it. This is pretty huge because what this does is it really democratizes the use of these really powerful tools that in the past, there was a significant learning curve that you needed to get over in terms of understand what Power Automate Desktop is, how it works, and so on and so forth. So you still have to go through that training, but now you have a buddy, you have a co-developer, a Copilot that can make suggestions for you and automate a lot of the script building. Not only can you create your scripts and your robotic processes faster, but Copilot will actually make suggestions based on what you're building and how you're building it. We'll make suggestions on ways to improve that and additional things that you can do with Power Automate that allows you to use it in a much more effective way than you did if you were doing it yourself. In the days before Copilot, when you're building a desktop flow, there's quite a bit of effort you needed to go through to be able to make that script. You had to plan on what that process was going to be. You then had to figure out what the specific steps were and how to do it. And then you had to know how to actually build it and the language, if you will, of creating that script. Now Copilot can just do that for you. So as a maker, I can create more comprehensive RPA processes, and I can do it in a faster way by having Copilot as my co-developer, which is really, really powerful. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about Copilot across the Power Platform is it is enabling makers to be able to do more without having to have the detailed knowledge and training and expertise that you used to have. Now you can have makers who have a little less experience be able to create even more powerful processes and scripts using Copilot.
Bill, that's fantastic. Like, there's huge things that Copilot is bringing into Power Automate Desktop and Power Platform and really the Microsoft stack end to end. Yep. That we're seeing in organizations. So you gave us a great example before about invoice processing and kind of where Power Automate for Desktop comes in and enhances that. And then you gave us like a high level of how Copilot can help further improve that. So I'm an organization, I'm just getting into Power Automate for Desktop. Do I have to rethink my governance strategy now for Power Automate for Desktop if I'm introducing Copilot into this? Like, I'm an admin. Am I automatically standoffish now because you brought up AI technologies in this? Or like, how should I approach my organization if I'm thinking about implementing this?
Yes, you do. There are lots of implications from a governance perspective that need to be taken into account. Everything from licensing to turning the features on and where you enable those features and how you enable those features. I think there's things that you need to take into account from an overall process perspective in terms of how people are going to use it, where they're going to use it, and which developers are going to have it enabled. But from a governance perspective, there's all kinds of things to consider, right? You have to consider the data that you're going to be working on and the data sets that you're going to be integrating with, and know the sort of the parameters of what AI can do and how it can help and what it can't do and what some of the limitations are. So those are all things that have to be taken into account from an overall governance perspective. We're working on an overall kind of a concept around a center of excellence for Copilot as an overall solution. One of the things we're coming into that's coming into play here is who gets access to it, when do they use it, and where do they use it, as those decisions have to be made as an organization. But ensuring that there is, security compliance, there is data compliance, and all of the things around using generative AI within the organization that has to be part of the conversation. So it adds a level of complexity to an organization using the platform, but the upside is the ability to do things faster and to have makers be able to get in and start using the platform much quicker than they were before.
Oh, I'm trying to restrain myself from my governance soapbox, Ken, or Bill. Well, Ken too, but Bill, I want to think about this a little bit more. I first want to tie it back into Copilot for a minute, because Ken and I had the privilege of speaking recently at a masterclass on governance at scale. And one of the things that I borrowed a bit from our good friend Leanne Zelsman and how we manage the Power Platform at scale at Microsoft is the fact that part of the scale issue is not the technology, it's the support model. It's how does admin scale? And so using Copilot to walk your users through troubleshooting and support can actually minimize some of those support requests and impact. So I did want to get that point in there. But let me maybe ask this, because when I think about governance is not just tooling and admin centers. As much as we love Ken, it's processes, it's your advisory boards, it's your in partnership with legal and security and IT and your business stakeholders. And ideally, true governance should be about enablement, securely taking away the risk or minimizing the risk, but enabling your organization. So I would say that Power Automate Cloud Flows, there's a very clear use case for all business makers. And I'm actually starting to use the term like augmented knowledge workers, if you will, with these tools.
Yep.
Power Automate Desktop, that gets a little scary.
Yeah.
It gives you a lot of functionality. It gives you access to systems that maybe are outside of the Microsoft admin's purview, right? Because you can now extend beyond that. And so do you see this as a tool that's for all of those knowledge workers or only for a select few? How are you guiding organizations through that process?
You're absolutely right. Don't get me on my soapbox, because, we've had this conversation many times around overall governance from a Power Platform perspective and building community and being able to grow the use of Power Platform across an organization. There are very specific use cases that you would want to use Power Automate Desktop for. It's not necessarily for everyone. Where you have legacy applications, let me use an example. We have a customer at Global Telecom. They provide cell phone service for people all over the globe. And they're using Power Automate Desktop for specific purposes around revenue leakage. And because they have multiple billing systems and multiple processes within those billing systems, they have to be able to match the data from system to system to system. And they built an application to do that. That is actually a cloud app that they deployed, but they do have a desktop solution for their end users to enter information and to check the actual data and monitor and manipulate the data within the solution. And they're using Power Automate Desktop to automate the checking and the validation process using that desktop app. That's not something that every worker or every knowledge worker in the organization needs to access or should access. So they're using it in a surgical way for those specific applications that have a desktop interface and don't have a cloud interface. They may use data in the cloud and they may use, cloud databases to store that data, but the actual interface between the end user and the application itself is done on the desktop. So that's a very specific use case. Power Automate Desktop can be utilized for really simple actions. Like, for instance, if you wanted to automate something on your application and build something local that's just for you, like enabling Bluetooth or, connecting to the machine and doing something on the machine, that can be done. And so in that use case, Power Automate Desktop could be for everybody. But what we typically see is organizations are using Power Automate Desktop for specific RPA solutions that are enabling legacy applications while they migrate those applications to the cloud and rebuild them over time with the new experience. they have to still do their daily work. And so they want to be able to use automation like they have it in the capabilities in the cloud. They want to do that on the desktop, and they want to be able to streamline their processes and do more with less. And that's what Power Automate Desktop is doing for them there. So the long answer to your short question is it's a scalpel. It's not a hammer. And you use it specifically for the business use cases that are defined based on what it's really good at doing. And so if you want to expose Power Automate and Cloud Flows to the general users, that's available through SharePoint and through your Power Automate solution that you have within Power Platform. You can let people create their own Cloud Flows, again, from an administrative and a governance perspective, accessing data and connectors that they are licensed to and that they should have access to. But with Power Automate Desktop, it is sort of, it's used in a place where companies are migrating from their legacy platforms into the cloud, and there's a very specific use for it. So it's a little bit more of a scalpel as opposed to a hammer.
So, Bill, let's get surgical here. I'm a customer.
Yeah.
I'm using RPA. I want to use Copilot. What are some of the pitfalls, the gotchas? Like, what is your advice to me in terms of adopting the platform? What are some of the things that I should be looking for? Is there anything maybe specific, right? I don't want to necessarily throw Purview into this, but I'm concerned about my data and data privacy and classification, and maybe data leakage, data exfiltration.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about patterns and practices of successful implementations
of Copilot within Power Automate Desktop?
Just RPA.
RPA in general?
Yes.
Yeah.
RPA in general, and specifically within Copilot, because as Wendy mentioned, like one of the things that we've heard consistently from customers, even in the masterclass that we gave, is I'm scared.
Mm-hmm.
It's accessing my data.
Yep.
What does Copilot know? Now we're introducing all of these things together. So help us out a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that when you turn Copilot on within your organization, it's only looking at the data in your organization. And there are governance and security policies that you need to do before turning on Copilot anywhere, right? There is work that needs to be done. For instance, on the M365 side of things, from a Copilot perspective, you really have to do and make sure that your SharePoint environment is structured from a security perspective in the right way. So you're not exposing documents to people who shouldn't have access to them. It's the same thing from a Power Automate Desktop perspective. We have a global financial organization that we worked with that we're implementing Power Automate Desktop with, and they're actually building out a whole team that they provide white glove services to various departments within the organization that need to use Power Automate Desktop, but don't have the skills themselves. So they basically built a Center of Excellence team that has a development group that creates these Power Automate Desktop solutions for the various departments. And one of the things that is absolutely critical is making sure that you are building solutions that are connecting to systems that have the right credentials and have the right security based on what that specific business process is that you're automating. You can't, as an administrator, just give, global access to everybody and all of your data across the organization, and that's just not a good thing to do. So from a Power Automate perspective, being able to ensure that the RPA process that you're creating has the credentials to be able to access the system and the right user privileges for that specific user for the data that that process is going to be using. Think about it like when we onboard somebody into an organization from an IT perspective, we put them into a user group, and that user group has specific access to specific data. Let's say it's in finance, and they are in a specific security group within finance, and they have access to specific systems. RPA is no different. You have to create your bot to have the same access, and you have to take into account when you're building your process to ensure that it has the same capabilities that a human would have that is doing that specific process that you're going to be automating. So from a security perspective, you have to take that into account from an RPA perspective. From a Copilot perspective, it's a little bit different, where as an administrator and from a governance perspective, you have to ensure that when you're using Copilot, it has the right access level to that data as well. The thing to remember with Copilot, though, is that where we are with Copilot in Power Automate Desktop is it doesn't remember any of what data access that it had in its previous session. It's not collecting that information. You're basically telling it to, hey, build a script that does these things or build a process that does these things using this data set. It doesn't remember what that actual data is. It just checks to see and make sure that it has access to it and then executes the workflow on that data set that it's doing. So it's exactly the same as if a human were executing that function and has the right permissions and privileges to access that data. It's the same thing with Copilot. Copilot is not storing that information anywhere. It's not learning anything from that perspective. It's just doing what you tell it to do or automating the script to be able to execute something that you're telling it to do. I hope that makes sense.
It does, Bill. Like, one, that was really, really good. The biggest thing I took away from it, like not trying to summarize that moment of brilliance that you had right there at all, but that organizations really need to pay very close attention to their security as it relates to their data, right?
Yes.
It would be remiss if they did not go back and revisit and look at things like, their SharePoint permission structure, their SQL, SAP, and then so on and so forth. Protecting the identity. Wait, who might have said that a few times? Oh, me. It was me. Protecting the identity and the permissions of things is first and foremost. It is your first line of defense, and you absolutely should be doing that.
We're running into this a bit with our customers today, with the Copilot conversation, with the Power Platform conversation, because these tools are just superpowering people and to accomplish more with what they already had in terms of their knowledge. And a lot of people are looking at Copilot or looking at the Power Platform and saying it's exposing data or it's adding risk when they've kicked the can on their data estate on securing that. And so it is a really important point, Ken, that it's not necessarily just about governing the Power Platform or these RPA tools. It's really about controlling your data. If your data is secure and if you've done the right processes, and which honestly a lot of companies don't prioritize because it's a cost center, then you're able to use these tools and say yes and empower your people with confidence, knowing that your data is secure. So I want to add on to that because it's a daily customer conversation.
It is.
It is, but I'll also say that this is nothing new.
Yeah.
No.
At all. It's nothing new at all, okay? This is the exact same problem that we had when we introduced M365 and then, this little tool that you might have heard of called Delve.
Yeah.
As soon as folks saw Delve, oh my God, it's like the wacky waving arm man, that's in front of the car lots and everything else. People are just going just bonkers. I can see all of these files and oh my goodness. And, what is this? And why can't I see Sean's data and this? Well, because Sean shared it with you. That's why you can see it.
Yep.
Oh, Wendy can't see this file. Prove it to me. Okay, now I have to go back and audit the security. I have to show this and then do all of these different things, right? It's a never ending cycle.
I was at the Gartner Data and AI conference just recently in Orlando. There was an insurance company that was basically doing a showcase of how they've implemented AI. And the CIO, he said, we started a data alignment and data cleansing and data strategy and data security project 3 years before we got into AI. And he said every month, the president and the CFO would say, do we really need to invest in that? I mean, it's a money suck and it's a time suck. And oh my God, we're in this morass. And he said, now we're able to deploy AI faster than our competitors are because we did that 3 years ago. And I kept telling them, this is going to pay off. Just keep at it. Mm-hmm. And he said the struggle got harder and harder and harder as they went into year 3 and they were just finishing things up. And then when AI came around, they went, we can do this because our data and our security and all the work we did to cleanse our data and to make it right is, now prepares us for being able to really accelerate. And that was the number one answer, or that was the nugget that I think everybody took away from the conference. And there were thousands of people there, was we really need to get our data and our security and our structure and all of that in order for us to be able to move forward. Otherwise, you're going to get, duplicate data, and you're going to get really, really strange answers when you try and implement AI against that data set. And if you don't do that work up front, then you're in trouble. And it's just like the Delve days and the SharePoint days.
Yes.
And we went through all of that, and all of us have experienced that many, many times with many customers. Organizations really need to grapple with that. they can deploy AI and Copilot effectively while they're working on that, but they absolutely have to invest in structuring their data to make sure that it's not being accessed by the wrong people. And a lot of times they're able to do that with systems sort of programmatically by, creating a script that ensures that, data is only delivered to people who are using that app in that way. And they're not thinking about data as a strategy and managing data and having a data management strategy as an organization. And you need to do that in order to be able to really effectively use AI. And that means whether it's Copilot and the answers that it gives back to you as Power Automate Desktop, or if you're using Copilot in M365, or you're using Copilot in even just on the desktop, asking specific questions of Copilot and getting answers back may be wrong because your data is not aligned properly.
Hey, Bill, thank you
Everyone's
so
a
much.
knowledge manager now.
Yeah, that was really good. That was really, really good. So we're coming to the end of the episode, and with Copilot's introduction into Power Automate for desktop, there's probably a bunch of good documentation to help people get started and to find out more.
There is.
And any tips that you'd like to pass along for people to get going?
So I'm gonna throw this out. I use this every single day, and I think it's because Microsoft has done a lot of work in terms of enabling Copilot. But I use Copilot Desktop every single day, and if I'm doing something and I need to get a question answered, and it's something that I could dig through the learn.microsoft.docs.microsoft.com and try and sort through that. But Copilot already knows where that those answers are, and it knows where that data is. So I can just ask Copilot, hey, how do I do this in Power Automate Desktop? And it'll come back with all the answers. And it'll give me suggestions of people in the organization that I need to connect with who know this stuff and are experts. And so I use that all the time. And it's a really powerful tool. But, we have docs.microsoft.com. We have is it adopt.microsoft.com? Yeah. And we have a lot of resources that we've learn.microsoft.com that organizations can go to be able to figure this out. And then there's a massive community that people can connect to within the outside of Microsoft, but in the Microsoft community, and lots of blogs and users out there that are working with this. One of the biggest tools that I use today is YouTube. And I follow all of the Microsoft YouTube channels, Phil Topness and all the guys that are doing the garage and all of the videos on using the tools. There's some really, really good information there that is really, really powerful stuff.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. Really appreciate that. So I just want to give you a heads up. We're going to have you back one more time because Ken and Wendy are already drafting questions in a side chat. So
we're arm wrestling in the chat about all of the questions we want to ask.
Yeah.
So.
I'm down. Let's do this. Let's go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bill. Looking forward to the next episode.
You're welcome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.